Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about, is AI a craft? Right? Is AI art craftsmanship? And I think this is kind of pushing back against some things that I hear from people who think that it's cheap, it's slop, it's lazy, and there's definitely a lot of talk about or thinking that AI is going to replace human creativity or replace humans. And I think what's kind of divorced from here is understanding what it takes to make AI art and how hard it is and the difficulty and what types of people are actually making AI art. And for me, of course, I'm biased. I love it. I think it unlocks a lot of creativity that heretofore was not really possible or is just going to be really fun and exciting and new. And so first I'd love to, jump in and get really nerdy and define what is craftsmanship and understand what ways we can think about craftsmanship, and then jump into how people are doing it, look at a little bit of the tools, and then look at a few artists, 3 artists in particular that I really like that kind of show what AI artists are doing that is maybe a little bit different. There's definitely that slop that's out there, but then there's also that really kind of, to me, really compelling AI art that makes it really, really cool and makes it a new medium that is worth jumping into and looking into. So first, let's get really nerdy. And here we've got, what is craftsmanship? And here we are in the Cambridge Dictionary. And we've got here skill at making things, or the skill with which something was made or done. We've got skill in making things, especially by hand, and the quality of something that has been skillfully made. Now, I think this, to me, already, I could say that AI art is craftsmanship because it does take, skill in making AI art, and it is by hand. You have to type, you have to prompt engineer. I mean, are you going to tell me that developers and engineers are not a craftsman in their own right, in their own way? I think they are. And I think you can see sometimes there's elegant software, there's elegant design that's being made, and that comes from craftsmanship, right? And I think the same thing is true here of AI art. Here's another interesting thought on AI art, which I really loved. I found this from St. Francis Assisi. He who works with his hands is a laborer. He who works with his hands and his head is a craftsman, and he who works with his hands and his head and his heart is an artist. Now, I really do think that, first of all, deeming something as art or not is sometimes an area of a great subjectivity. Like thinking something is good music or bad music or good comedy or bad comedy, it's very subjective. There are plenty of people that I know who, I might tell a joke and people say, hey, that's not funny. I was like, well, I think it's funny, right? And the same thing is true of art, right? And I think that's where we're at right now with AI art, which is that there is some level of subjectivity happening here where people are looking at it and say, hey, I don't like it. They might have a preconceived notion or ideology behind that, thinking that, hey, look, I don't like the idea of AI creating art, and then they'll preconceived not like it. And I think that is happening, right? And if anything, I bet you there are plenty of people out there who, if I showed them a bunch of human art and I told them it was AI art, they would have this knee-jerk reaction towards it. And I think that's important to note here. But that's a bit of a tangent. But what I'm loving about this is that, working with your hands and your head, that is definitely a craftsmanship, and that is definitely what's happening here with something like Midjourney or Runway or Sora or what have you, which, are different tools which you have to learn. They are skills, right? And I'll show you in a second. And then there's the heart part, the artist part. And I think we can feel that in different types of art, right? And even in AI art, we can feel the extent to which the AI artist has kind of put their heart and their mind into it in a way where they are pushing the medium further than before, their own creativity, and maybe even vistas that we haven't even thought about before. Right. Now, here's this really nice article from Iman Haider, which I found via Google. And the way that he described it is, the art of craftsmanship is not stitching a shoe or an apparel, although that's important. It's about caring who's going to wear it. And I think this does get to me, what is the beauty of art, and AI art in particular, where in terms of art, you're thinking about the audience. You're thinking about the conversation that your art is having a conversation with, right? Like oftentimes, I'm used to be a art historian, and if you walk into a museum and you don't know anything about the art, definitely there are people that go in there and they just appreciate the art for its art. Like, do they think it's beautiful or not? And that is one level to experience the art for sure. And then there's, for me at least, the way I sometimes appreciate art is there's that level, which I do appreciate. And then there's the art where I like to understand where this artist sits in the milieu of art that they're responding to. Because art to me is a conversation, right? And so, like, not only is it a conversation with the audience, but it's also a conversation with other art and the history of art itself. And therefore, how does that, push and pull? How are genres being mixed, or how is a theme being remixed into a modern era? I mean, we can feel this in hip hop music, right? Where hip hop music is a conversation with itself constantly. It's a battle. It's a war that is happening constantly between poems, between moments in time, between West Coast, East Coast, international, global, all this kind of stuff. And so I think without understanding the conversation, it's hard to appreciate the art itself. Without understanding the Kendrick Drake beef, it's hard to understand what Kendrick means. It's even hard to understand what Kendrick is trying to achieve without knowing what his history of his catalog is, right? And so these are all things I think are really important in understanding. These are kind of like foundational points to me of how we understand it. So on one side, we're understanding how craftsmanship is a skill in making things, right? A skill that you can acquire. And then art is something that is a melding of hands, head, and heart from St. Francis. And also, like, it's a conversation with the audience and who is going to consume it, etc. Now, I think, understanding that, let's look at the skill aspect first. So if I'm inside of Midjourney and I'm constantly in Midjourney playing around, like, at first thought, it looks like Midjourney is something easy. And I think people who haven't played with it, Midjourney being maybe one of my favorite tools, is it's hard to quite understand how hard it is to use, right? So some people might just think that, hey, I type in rabbit walking down the street in New York City, for example. Let's say that was my prompt, right? And it's going to pump that out. And I just want to do this live for you so you can see the process. It does take a while. So it's going to take us about a minute. So you're 25%. See right here. It's going to take a while to load. And that's something that's important here to understand, that there are nuances to these platforms. Right? It takes time. It takes loading. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Here, I've got a rabbit that looks not bad. And it's impressive for what it is. I didn't even take a photo. I could just type it in and have this rabbit like this, right? But what if this isn't exactly the style that I want? How am I going to get that? Maybe I want the rabbit on its hind legs, right? Maybe I want the rabbit in a particular photographic angle, etc. These are all things that I need to understand how to communicate to Midjourney in order to get that. So I can say rabbit on its hind legs with a top hat, walking down the street in New York City. And let's say that I actually didn't want it to be a photo. I wanted it to be a animation, and I have to jump into here to Niji to understand how Niji works, right? So there, I'm jumping into here. Niji is animation style, and I can say like illustration style comic, okay? So all of these things I've learned over the course of quite a few months and over a year now, of playing around with Midjourney to the point where I understand kind of the nuance of playing around with it. Now, from here, it's going to give me another image, and I'm going to have to play around with that. And that process takes a lot of time. Now, you can see here, I was trying to do a few things here where I was trying to create a image of Terminator showing up to a Hollywood red carpet. And of course, it took quite a bit of time for me to get the right one that I wanted. I didn't like the way that looked, the way that this looked. I might have to go into the editor, right? I might have to jump into here, jump into the editor and like change out certain things. All these things are skills that I have learned over the course of playing around with Midjourney over the last few years. Here, look at that. So this is kind of cool. Rabbit on its hind legs with a top hat walking down the street. See, still maybe not what I wanted, etc. So it takes time. Right? The point here is that it takes time, and all these tools take a bit of time to get to know. And that's why there are, websites and communities like Curious Refuge who are, very specific on trying to help you understand what are, AI animation, AI filmmaking, AI advertising, AI documentary, right? All of these different niches of using AI in different ways for different crafts, different areas, genres, industries. Same thing with Super, right? Where Super is more productivity centric, but they're also doing things like
Comic book illustration.
showing people how to, use Midjourney like a pro, etc. And so that gives you a feel now, just a little bit of a taste. I mean, there's plenty of videos out there on the internet, on YouTube, Theoretically Media, and Matt Wolf and others who are kind of showcasing how people are using these tools in more and more complex ways. And the question is not so much like, is it that, at least to me, is it that these tools are replicating what real artists do? It's also that they're expanding what artists can do and changing the definition of what art is, as well as changing how we think about creativity and originality, and as well as like how we think about character differently. These are the kind of cool, to me, amazing creative challenges that face us in the near future. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things to kind of be concerned about, right? And I think what was interesting, especially since Sora just launched, where we had this leak from apparently a group of small artists, right, within the larger artist group. So now that Sora's out, I can tell you, like, there's been hundreds and hundreds of alpha artists in the creator program, and including myself. And this is just a small group of people. Let's see here, like maybe like a dozen or more who signed this petition here. In my opinion, they might have gone in here with some preconceived notions, or they might just not have felt like they were tapped in the way that they could have. And I think the Sora team is very concerned and they're trying their best, right, to address this. And so here they say, artists are not your unpaid R&D. We are not your free bug testers, PR puppets, trained data validation tokens. They are hundreds of artists provide unpaid labor through bug testing, feedback, and experimental work for the program of a $150 billion valued company, while hundreds contribute for free. A select few. Sorry, I got to drink out of my stein here. A select few will be chosen through a competition to have their Sora creative film screen, blah, blah, blah. And they're calling it corporate art washing. We're releasing this tool to give everyone an opportunity to experiment with what 300 artists were offered a free and unlimited access to this tool. We are not against the use of this AI technology as a tool for the arts, blah, blah, blah. So there's a little bit of contradiction here to me. Let's go down one by one here. So to me, my biggest pushback against this in particular is that free bug test, PR puppets, trained data validation tokens. I mean, to me, I think this idea of creative programs, first of all, is fairly common across all the AI programs currently. Runway, Luma, Hailua, Kling, all these companies, which I've talked about on this channel, and Midjourney and Kriya and all these programs have creator programs themselves. So this is not unique to OpenAI. So first of all, I've got to push back hard on this free bug tester idea. Also, bug testing is common amongst the industry of tech, period. And there may be some issues with this. There may be some kind of feedback on this that I think is maybe warranted or unwarranted. Hackathons have gotten their own kind of flack for, creating free code for people. But hackathons are also an opportunity for people to play with technologies for the first time. So so it is a concern, but at the same time, it is common practice. So this is where I kind of push back on this. I think I suspect, or I wonder if these artists had never encountered a creator program prior. I don't know. But I get the concern here, like that they feel that they're being used. I understand that, especially in this moment of a lot of anti-AI ideology. So I get that. Secondly, this idea that the artists are getting free access. I mean, this is kind of the people who got into this, I think, are lucky, right? To be able to be selected because they were tinkerers. They have shown themselves to be very strong artists in and of themselves. I think that shows that not only did this program prize their art and their work, but also wanted to give them opportunity to play with the tool before everybody else had. This is a very privileged group of people, of 300 plus artists, who got to play with a tool that might be one of the few that can change the world in terms of how we view creativity, especially video creativity. So I get the concern here. There's also another statement, which I think is a bit more succinct. The unlicensed use of creative works, it's just one statement. This is the statement on AI training, signed by 36,000 people, including a lot of artists and writers, etc. The unlicensed use of creative works for training generative AI is a major unjust threat to the livelihoods of the people behind those works and must not be permitted. Now, I think this is a very succinct statement where, and this is definitely a legal thing where I am definitely not fit to to comment on in a way that is satisfying to anybody who's watching or listening to this. But I think it's interesting that the main focus here is on training, right? In this case, these guys, their kind of thrust is that they don't want these big companies, but in particular OpenAI, and they singled out OpenAI for some reason, even though, again, OpenAI is doing similar things to what all the other folks are doing out there. So for some reason, I think maybe it's the company being valued at a high level. But if you look at my other video, which I'll link down below, all the companies that are playing in the video space are like almost multi-billion-dollar companies, or are all multi-billion-dollar companies. So I don't get that. Secondly, I think their whole issue is like open source, right? So open source video generation. But I think this might misunderstand how open source video generation works, and or a closed source video generation works, or the training of these models works. Because look, like, it costs a huge amount of money. And I cover this again in my other post. I highly recommend checking it out, how much money these companies have and why that matters. Essentially, long story short, it costs a lot of money, energy, research, tools, data, and GPUs to be able to train these models. And open source in some ways is always going to be behind, because open source might not always have that huge chunk of money to train these models. Now, it's going to be ahead in other ways, but closed models are probably going to be able to lap them rapidly because of their user bases, because of the money they have, etc. But it remains to be seen how that's all going to play out. So I think that throws a little salt on this issue of open source, because it's like there's a lot going on here, right? And maybe that's another theme for another video, but that gives you a sense of kind of my sense of this particular statement in toto. Whereas this one, they are focusing on the almost like where they to probably a certain extent view AI companies as stealing creative data or creative works to train their models. And I think that's a fair concern, to the extent that, hey, if I prompt a model and it's able to churn out my exact novel, maybe that's an issue. At the same time, to what extent are we as humans referencing each other, right? Standing on the shoulders of each other, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? You don't get Einstein without all the people that came before Einstein, including Newton, etc. You don't get Picasso without all the other artists that came before, like back to art history, right? Art history is a history of artists responding to each other, learning from each other. In art school, you master the pen, you master the painting brush, you master the sketchbook, etc., in order to be able to innovate and change and do your own types of work, which are usually very referential to other people's work, right? How many times do you go to a museum and you look at a painting and you think to yourself, oh, that looks like blank painting, right? And so to what extent is AI doing a perfect reference to whatever these artists might be thinking is their art? Or to what extent is it hallucinating along the way to creating something new? Big open question here. And it is a technical question and maybe a legal question as well. So I'm not sure even if it's able to be tracked, to what extent, if I go into Midjourney and I say, generate for me a Miyazaki style video, to what extent is it referencing only Miyazaki to generate that art? Or is it also generating all art that is similar to Miyazaki as well to generate that art? Big question to me. And lastly, I think there is this case that has been made in other places concerning fair use, and to what extent fair use can be used to argue in favor of AI training. And I wonder if that will land. Again, I'm not a legal person, but I have heard lawyers speak on this issue. So I'm very curious how that all lands. So I think I've segued away from, or tangentialized away from craftsmanship to kind of go into where I think there are some concerns about AI, legitimate concerns about AI, in terms of like how artists are being used, how artworks are being used. But still, to me, that does not take away from craftsmanship, because, as I've mentioned, it is hard, right? It is not easy to do these things with these tools. It might get easier over time, but as you can see with Sora today, it is an complex tool. It is not an easy tool to use, right? You go into Sora and you're in here, you're generating, let's say, like a collection of trucks, right? I can't even get it to say Coca-Cola correctly. I have to go into the storyboard here and I have to use the storyboard to change the way that things are being appearing here, and I have to go back and generate that, etc. In this case, like, even look at this. Like, I'm working on a short film right now where a girl is using this little, you can see for that split second here, there's a spinning cube, right? That's, generating mist. And every time I generate it, it turns into an iPad, right? Every time I generate, I can't get it to work. Here, she's I got a spinning cube for a split second, and then it's an iPad. These things are not hard to use. They kind of have a mind of their own in some ways, not literally, but. And here I've got a spinning misty cube watering plants that turn into an ice cube, and this one isn't even moving correctly. So like, this stuff is I always say it's persnickety. This is one of my favorite words to use here, but like, it's its own monster, right? And it's a skill to be able to learn how to use this. It's just like, in my opinion, it's just like a samurai sword maker who has to grapple with this piece of metal and understand how the metal works, how to shape the metal, the heat of the metal, and all these little aspects of the metal have to be understood. And the same thing is true for AI, which itself is like this piece of metal, which you have to kind of mold into place as you kind of learn its nuance here. And the thing that I think is interesting though about AI is that there's no mastery to it, right? I definitely have in my opinion, a lot more experience than the average person, but I have not figured it out. I have not completely mastered it at all, because there almost is no complete mastery. Maybe with the sword maker, even, there's no mastery. With craftsman, maybe there is no mastery. There is just better, more perfection, not complete perfection. So I think this is kind of where I view where this kind of sticks for me, is like, how are we going to understand how AI works as a craft, and how do we understand what is possible with AI moving forward? And I think those are really big questions to me about what is the future of this thing. And I look to some of my favorite artists for inspiration, right? So first, Mac Bakonet, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I really love his work, and it's always got this kind of like peculiar atmospheric sci-fi style art. It's kind of galactic. He's got all this stuff in the background. He or she has, such a specific art style that they've created their own Patreon just to like learn from them. And I've checked out some of the content there. It's really unique how they're kind of pushing Midjourney to its limits, right? Another one that I really love and I always share is Gonaji, right? Gonaji is kind of like almost like surreal punk rock alien, very strange, using a lot of different tools. As you can see here, it's got Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Comfy. Like, look at that. Like, and I think what I love about this is that you might not have been able to dream this without AI, right? If you go through Gonaji's work, it's like, look at that. It's like alien punk rock campers, right? Surreal campers, and just the level of detail and all the things that clearly this person let it ride to some extent, but also had a particular vision that they keep kind of going down the rabbit hole of. It's kind of like horror-ish, and I really love this one in particular, but it's like, look at that, just the art itself that's on the clothing, and then just the faces, all this kind of stuff. It getting to this level, in my opinion, is not easy, because not only do you have to have a vision, but you have to be able to push the AI model to a place where you think is interesting, and you kind of have to write it out a little bit, as opposed to, I think to some extent, when you have a particular vision of a painting, maybe you might paint exactly what you have in your mind, but in fact you don't, right? You're kind of writing with your creativity, your intuition a little bit. But in this case, with AI, your paintbrush is a little bit more intelligent, right? You're kind of using, in a way, the rest of humanity as a paintbrush, right? And I think that's really, really interesting. And lastly, I'll show you this last one. This is Boltron. I love Boltron's work. It's just really kind of like alien surreal, right? And just look at how amorphous that is, using Comfy UI in this case. And just really, really beautiful work that it kind of makes you feel a certain way. It's just like eerie, biological ghosts from the deep. I don't even have to know how to describe it, but it's just like very, very oddly specific, but unique unto itself, and has a particular creative vision. And so this is the kind of work that I love to see, that I think underlines to me why AI art is so exciting, because you can start to feel things that you never thought you could feel before, because AI art allows you to dream in new ways. It allows you to take your dreams and put them into reality, and then maybe let AI kind of morph them even further. And so I think that's kind of where we are, right, with all of this, even today. And this is only a time capsule, as I always say, of the moment. There's a lot more to come. I'm very excited for, now with Sora out and a lot of tools releasing new and newer updates, I'm very excited to see where all this lands. And I do really think that AI is a craft, and I recommend everybody learn it, because I think it's very powerful. As you can see from these 3 artists that we showed, it's like, what can you do? What can you not do? So thanks everybody for tuning in. Would love to hear what you think. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback on a lot of things that I said. There's plenty of things in here that maybe are even contradictory or hypocritical. I'm happy to kind of fall on that sword. This is only thoughts from my mind here that just come off the dome a bit. But there are a lot of things that I think that are worth thinking about in terms of AI and AI as a craft. So talk to you soon.